Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
SportsTalk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome in to another episode of The Lager Line, brought to you by Clutch City Lager of Carbox Brewing. As always, I'm your host, Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire. Today, as we continue our discussions about the 2022 Houston Rockets offseason and where things go from here, I'm joined by longtime Houston sports media member Adam Wexler. Adam has been around in broadcast media covering Houston sports, both for radio and TV, for about 25 years, and he's worked off and on with Rockets broadcasts since 2008. These days, he's co-host of the A-Team each afternoon on SportsTalk 790, the official flagship radio station of the Rockets, and he's also part of the Rockets radio network team for game broadcast. Adam, thanks for taking the time. How are you?
Doing great. Good to be with you. Looking forward to the season, which finally isn't too far off in the distance.
Yeah, we've got the schedule coming out later this week, according to reports. We'll get to that in a few minutes, but I don't want to lead with the schedule because, honestly, the NBA schedule, it is what it is. The formula, it's all known, and especially if you're a rebuilding team, which the Rockets are, which teams in the West you play 3 times versus the normal 4 isn't really all that sexy of a storyline. So I'm actually going to lead with something that happened at your station last week when Stephen Silas stopped by, an hour-long interview with Matt Thomas, who, of course, is play-by-play for the Rockets broadcast, also hosts the Matt Thomas Show, noon to 3 each day on Sports Talk 790, leading into you and Adam Clinton with the A-Team to finish up the afternoon. When Stephen had that hour-long interview with Matt, what were the biggest takeaways to you? Were there 1 or 2 things that really stood out as far as what's gone on this offseason and what he's going to be trying to do in the upcoming year?
I think the thing that stood out most probably had a lot to do with last season more than anything else, was his acknowledgement of what I thought was obvious to everybody, but sometimes gets lost when people start calling for coaches' names or heads, and this guy's not getting it done, and this, that, and the other. And he talked about the obvious need and desire to allow players to make mistakes, because that's the only way they're going to learn from them. And that's what happened throughout much of, his years here. And certainly last year, I think, could the team have won a couple more games? Probably so. And he kind of even acknowledged that, in that they're trying to make this group the group that does win games, the group that is capable of being part of the foundation for a winning program. But in order to do so, there are things that they did last year that might not have assisted them on a 5-minute stretch or a weekly basis or in game in a certain situation. But I think it was to the benefit of what the future holds for the group that they had, and now the group that is very important that they'll be bringing in. And again, I think being a part of the covering this team and being there so often, I thought it was pretty easy to see. But I'm glad that he pointed it out.
How fun is it for you, by the way, just to actually get to hang out with him in person? I know y'all took the picture at the new 790 studio last week. You started this current run with Rockets Radio. Well, you started with the A-Team in the spring of 2019, and then the Rockets in that ensuing 2019 to 2020 season, right?
Right.
So basically the first 2 years that you were on the job, well, I shouldn't say the first 2 because most of 2019 to 2020 was normal until March. But then the first 2 years of the Stephen Silas administration had all sorts of limitations in terms of the things that you guys could do because of all the COVID protocols and everything to do with that. Even last offseason, some of that stuff was still in place. And certainly when Omicron hit in the middle of this past season, whereas now this is really the first time that you're actually able to do things like have Stephen Silas come to the studio and get to hang out with him as sort of a normal relationship. How different is that for you relative to the first 2 years of the Silas administration?
Very different. Normally, even as media members in general, let alone part of the radio broadcast team, time spent face to face, time spent even around a practice, just being able to sit down with them off the record, on the record, to talk about whatever. That really was virtually impossible to do. And certainly you lose the opportunity to get involved and really have a better idea of what you're talking about, both in game and on the air during a radio show. So that basically wasn't there. There were conversations, but there really wasn't a whole lot of face-to-face time. And that's where I think most everything really can get done. And so I think it'll be a much different perspective for us to have more of an opportunity to do that. So I'm looking forward to it for sure.
Yeah, I definitely am. And it's something that's so unique with regards to when he took the job, because even though he's entering year three, it feels like the Silas era is a little bit younger than that, because these past couple of years, it hasn't really felt like the full experience. And so in some ways, this offseason leading into this coming year is really going to be the first time since that 2019 to 2020 season, at least the first 3 quarters of it, that there's some form of normalcy. And yet, when it comes to Steven and his job, the Rockets do have to most likely make a decision on him by the end of this coming season, because he's in year three of a 4-year contract. The fourth year, according to reports, isn't even fully guaranteed. And you very rarely see coaches in the NBA go into the last year of their existing contract as lame ducks. Typically, teams decide one way or another. And I think it's even more likely here, given the aforementioned lack of a guarantee. So the Rockets need to see something from Steven that makes them think that he's the guy if you want to retain him moving forward. Yet, for obvious reasons, with a team this young, it's not really fair to judge him by wins and losses, because the things that have gone wrong the last couple of years, by and large, have absolutely nothing to do with him. So it's an odd situation in that the Rockets aren't really looking for a ton of wins next season, but you do somehow need to evaluate Steven for whether he's worth that next contract. What's the prism, in your opinion, Adam, that you should be looking at this through if you're the Rockets when you're trying to evaluate whether Stephen Silas is worth that next contract?
We'll start back with where I began the conversation. The players that were with the team last year need to have far fewer mistakes on exactly the things they've been teaching them. It's pretty obvious also defensively, there's going to be much more to it. There's going to be much more coaching going into it. They do have a foundation they're bringing back, and they're able to now put Tari Eason into that, put Jabari Smith into that, put Ty Washington into that. A group that they get to join that knows what Coach Silas wants. That last year's team didn't know that, because last year's team was so ridiculously young and new, and he was still only going into a first full season of NBA coaching without any, calendar cancellations or limited season, et cetera. So progress is obviously something that is clear that needs to be seen in the most important numbers, wins and losses. They need to win more games. They need to find a way to have more games where they look good from start to finish. They're a better, more talented team than one that should be losing as often as they have the past 2 years. And what I mean by that is there should be some nights where they're just better than the other team. Not a lot of nights. There are not a lot of terrible teams in the NBA right now, I don't think. But there should be some nights where they need to play like they know they're better and have that be executed out there on the court. The execution of what a Stephen Silas-led team should look like, that should also become evident, because I don't really think there's much of it's pretty obvious the Rockets wanted to do this with Coach Silas over the past 2 years, because I just don't really think they've had the opportunity to put that out there. The final 7 games of last year, I do think will have pretty strong weight into what they're doing this year, with KPJ and Jalen Green essentially running the team, running the offense through both of them, and allowing them to basically go get almost any shot or create a shot for somebody else that they wanted. And I think that was a good thing for this team, to see what kind of things that they're capable of doing for the rest of the guys out there. And now this year, the rest of the guys out there are better, I think, certainly with Jabari Smith. And I think the added development of everybody else they'll be playing with, especially inside with Sengun.
I think if there's one player that Steven's going to be judged most by, it's going to be Jalen Green and his development, simply because he's the closest thing to a true blue chip in the entire organization. He's the foundational piece that so many of these other pieces are being fit around. And one of the things that stood out to me about the Silas interview with Matt on a micro level, he referenced Jalen being a lot stronger, said it could particularly help him with his shooting depth and not being as off balance when he's trying to get it up from 25 feet away, for example. And Stephen made the comment that it might not show Jalen's added strength, that is, in pictures, but it's there. And that's something that, especially on social media, I think sometimes can get lost. People think whenever an athlete is underweight, that all you've got to do is just feed him a bunch of Big Macs, and all of a sudden you can solve the issue within a few weeks or months. Whereas clearly it's a very delicate process in that you want them to put on weight, but you don't want it to compromise that speed, that burst that makes them a top of the line NBA athlete. In the case of Jalen Green, as good of an athlete as there is. Even though he was a big, it sort of reminds me of Clint Capella and how the Rockets put on weight with Clint, but they did it very gradually over a number of years to where all of a sudden you look at him from 2018 compared to 2014, there was a huge difference, but not necessarily in one off season. It was a very gradual thing, and that's what they're doing with Jalen. And I mentioned that context because I think everyone is expecting more growth from Jalen, but at the same time, I'm not sure how much is realistic. Everyone compares him to Anthony Edwards, the Timberwolves top pick from a year ago, who finished his rookie season strong. But at least the top line statistics, you look at his from year 1 to year 2, Anthony Edwards scored 21.3 points per game compared to 19.3. Field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, both ticked up 2 or 3 points. Assists did improve per game from 2.9 to 3.8. So there was some improvement, but not drastic. And so I think when we talk about Jalen Green, his added strength, his growth, certainly he should be better than this past season, but I don't think the expectation should be that a 20-year-old Jalen Green, not even old enough to drink yet, is going to be a true superstar. So, Adam, in your eyes, what is a fair expectation for the level of growth that we could see from Jalen next year, given all of those comparative factors?
I definitely think looking at some of the other numbers, percentage numbers, usage rate numbers, true shooting percentage, drive percentage, his ability to score points off of those drives at a much more effective rate this year. And I'm glad you pointed out what Coach Silas said very, very specifically, because that's exactly what I pulled out of it as well. Because we've all seen some of the videos of him both working out and participating in some of the offseason activities, playing over in the Philippines and doing what he's doing with Adidas. And then obviously some of the run he got with all of the guys that came to his JG4 camp in Fresno. And there were a lot of them, both current former teammates and other players around the league, and then they just go out and get some run, and it's I think it's a lot of fun for the fans to see that. So some of those numbers beyond, did he go from 19 points to 23 points or 24 or 25? But again, you look at the way that he offensively finished the season, whether it's the last 7 game segment or the last 30 some odd game segment. He had really 3 seasons: the part of the year before he got hurt, the part of the year immediately after his return from injury, where it was still trying to get up to speed physically, and then how he closed out the year. So I would like to compare him to that guy at the end of the season when all of his numbers went up. And so if he just makes progress from that to where he can put the ball in the basket at a much more effective clip, and it will be from all over the court. He will still shoot 17 and 18-foot jump shots. I don't think with too much frequency, but more frequency than probably Rockets fans are used to over the last decade. And the strength aspect of it is simply going into the paint. I do think he's worked on his ball handling so much that he'll actually have the advantage over his defender a little bit more often when it's an isolation situation, but finishing over the help defender, through the help defender, over the help defender. That's where this added strength has to pay off. And it doesn't have to be, his first year as an NBA player off season, which obviously is year 2, but it has to start this off season. And I certainly think that it will. And again, those numbers at the end of last season are incredible, even in defeat all 7 games. He scored 29 points a game, but he shot 47% from the floor. He shot 40% on 10-plus attempts from three-point land. Those are exceptional numbers that if they're anywhere close to that during the season, they have a star.
You mentioned that last 7 game stretch a few times, and certainly it was impressive for Jalen. Of course, with Jalen, you can go back even further than that. Really, ever since February 1st, his numbers were absolutely electric. But those final 7 games, I think the really big variable that could have long-term implications was Kevin Porter Jr., who averaged better than 27 points, 7 assists, 7 rebounds per game over that stretch. Certainly he got more touches because there was no Christian Wood, there was no Eric Gordon, there was no Dennis Schroeder. But at the same time, it wasn't like he was just chucking. The efficiency was there as well. And of course, we know for the season as a whole, his catch and shoot numbers for three were really, really good. But the interesting thing to me about Kevin is that even if it's not all replicable when we're talking about that elite production at the end of the season, even if it's just say 75, 80% of that, all of a sudden that could make him a very, very valuable player. And the Rockets do have a decision to make on KPJ and his contract this offseason. He's entering year 4, which is when players on their rookie deals are eligible for extensions. It doesn't feel like it. We talked about it doesn't feel like Stevens in year 3. It definitely doesn't feel like KPJ is in year 4 because not only the COVID factors, but of course the circumstances that led to him going from Cleveland to Houston and then missing half of a season. He still feels so new, and we know all the issues off the court. But look, he is coming to a point contractually where you have to make a decision. Well, you don't have to. You do have, of course, his bird rights will be restricted. But the point that I'm getting to is that people always ask, well, is it worth extending him based on some of the off-court risk? Everyone knows his story, and you are going to have his bird rights. You're currently set up to have a ton of cap room next offseason, and that's important. Yet, if he builds on what he did to finish last year, then potentially you could get him at a much cheaper rate this offseason than if you wait until next offseason and he puts up a really good year and has a ton more leverage in contract negotiations. So where do you come down on potentially considering or not considering a KPJ extension by the time the season starts in October?
Well, first of all, that was quite a pseudo presentation you just gave to the GM and his staff in the room that they're actually doing right now, because that's exactly what they have to consider. And those are basically all of the factors. If there's no off the court considerations, you look at the basketball player and say, there's a real possibility there's a star here, a true can-do-it-all star. You didn't even mention any of his defensive capabilities, and there are a lot of them there for a player that's good size on the perimeter, that's capable and wants to be that kind of defender. You could build a basketball player like Kevin Porter Jr., and there'd be very few of them out there in the NBA right now. So that's what makes it so difficult. He obviously is well aware of some of the challenges that he's faced and put his teams through, both in Cleveland, here in Houston. I don't think it's any secret within the organization or even within his team that those are part of the things that they have to work their way through. And now it's a matter of, where do you want to take the risk? Do you want to take the risk now that he's already under contract? You're guaranteeing him money for this year, the next year, however long you put it in there. And the risk is in that, well, did he disappoint off the court? And now you're saddled with that, and he's not being productive for you. Maybe he's not even out there, versus do you take the risk that he plays out this season and is on the verge of becoming a star caliber player, on the verge of being a second player to Jalen Green's first, or very close to being the two guys that lead this team. And then you have to pay him accordingly, even with the off-court issues, because you probably can't afford to let a player that talented walk away. And then you look at the class itself. You're heading into next year, if you haven't done anything, and while you will have some of those contractual rights that give you more flexibility on what to do with him, what else would truly be out there in the next market or the market the year after, from a talent standpoint, that you think you're really able to go out and get? And I do think there are good players out there, and I do think there are parts that they could build with from outside through free agency, through max level free agency. But that's always a guessing game. It's always a maybe, because if there's one team out there that has money, that's great, and it's you, then you can go ahead and feel pretty confident that if that player's after one thing, you'll get him. That's pretty much never the case. I do think Houston will end up being plenty desirable, so I wouldn't be super concerned with that. But strictly talking about basketball, that's why I happen to like the way he plays. I think there's so much to his game that's vastly overlooked as a creator. It's both a curse and I think a great asset to have been the guy that followed James Harden, because Luka Doncic with his right hand plays tremendously similar to James Harden. And I think KPJ does a lot of those same things also, the good basketball things, because he can be as creative as he wants as long as his teammates are familiar with how he wants to do things. I think he'll be in very good position. And, one of those other things we were mentioning with Jalen Green and KPJ at those final 7-game stretch, both of them had tremendous increases in their finishing ability over those final 7 games, both in frequency, driving to the basket more than 11 times per game each, when neither of them was doing it more than 9 prior to those final 7 games. But they were at 46 and 47% respectively, with KPJ finishing second in that initial group over the course of the season. And then KPJ goes up to 54%. Jalen Green goes up to 55% in those final 7 games in their field goal percentage on drives. That's where they're at their best. Attack, attack, attack. And now it all comes back together, referring again to Silas's conversation. They want to go attack the basket, and they have 2 guys that are, in my opinion, exceptional at it. I'd probably lean on looking very, very strongly into taking care of KPJ this offseason rather than next, but it's a pretty tough question to answer.
Understood. And I recall from the exit interviews, KPJ himself pointed to the finishing ability as the one thing he was wanting to work on more than anything in the offseason. And I'm right there with you, because if you combine the catch and shoot numbers and the growth he had as a shooter this past season with the finishing from his first 2 seasons, then all of a sudden he's looking like a really, really good starting guard. I know we can quibble about, is he a point guard or a combo guard, whatever it is, but bottom line, a really good profile for an NBA rotation player. And there's no reason to think that he can't finish the way he did the first 2 seasons in the NBA. It's not like he lost athleticism. I think it's a combination of randomness and perhaps, he did have that on and off quad issue for most of the year, really, that started when Draymond got him very early in the season. So if he improves the finishing ability, and that's clearly a priority for him with the Rockets, there's no reason why he can't take the next step in terms of putting that with the shooting, and then year 4 being a real potential breakout for him at 22 years old, just now coming into his prime. And I think I'm also with you on the principle of using some of that cap space early if the right deals materialize, because when we're talking about $65 to $75 million in cap space, which is what a lot of the current projections have them at, the odds that you're going to use every single bit of that in 2023 for players that want to be in Houston, that are open to doing it, and all not on overpaid contracts, it's not that likely. So you should be open this offseason to using some of that space, certainly not all of it, but some of it, to improve your long-term positioning. You end up going into the next offseason with still max room, but maybe 55 million instead of 70 million. It shouldn't be viewed as some huge, huge hit. And the reason that I bring up that context, the Rockets may have an opportunity over the next few weeks with these Kevin Durant trade talks. Well, I guess they're not trade talks so far, because Brooklyn, of course, is just waiting until closer to training camp. We saw how the Rockets handled it with James Harden 2 years ago. Typically, these teams don't make moves prematurely, and they wait till there's some form of leverage in the form of the player actually being around his teammates, actual games being played, before the GM feels that they have to make a move. They see time as something that can help their bargaining positions. But if and when Brooklyn gets to the point of actually looking to trade Kevin Durant, there's a pretty compelling case that can be made that the Rockets, with some of those, not all, but some of those future draft assets from Brooklyn, the picks and the swaps, have exactly what the Nets could use most. Because the Nets, in a perfect world, would rebuild and have the option to get good players in the draft. They just can't do that right now because Houston owns their drafts through 2027. So when we talk about these potential KD trades, and the Nets aren't going to be able to get fair value, it never works that way. That's why you see so many teams that are trading stars these days leaning on draft capital. There may be a scenario where the Nets have more interest, hypothetically, in regaining some of those Houston draft assets than, say, keeping a good but not great player as part of a Durant trade that just sort of keeps them afloat and in that NBA middle class with no real hope to actually contend. So this is speculative, but if that type of scenario presents itself, are you potentially open to checking in on, a situation like the Suns and Bridges or a player of that caliber if the Nets say, hey, we might can let you have a pretty good quality young player if you'll give us our picks back? And of course, that would eat into some of your cap space as well. But just in terms of a thought exercise, are you potentially open to that?
I couldn't tell if you were actually saying, do you think the Rockets should call the Nets about trading the picks back to the Nets for Kevin
No, I'm
Durant
saying I
straight
think the
up?
net. No, I'm saying I think the Nets
I
would call
got you.
them.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I do think one player, and you named him, Bridges, would be of interest to do that. But it'd be hard for me to think that they can't believe, even though they'd be very presumptive and a little bit cocky to believe they can't find that player themselves through the picks that they already have. It's not a lottery. I mean, it's not a high lottery pick. It's a player who took a couple of years to develop. He's an excellent player now. He's part of a Western Conference championship caliber team. So yes, that type of player added to this is exactly what you want. I just wonder what's the value in it as he's getting even closer to needing to be paid. And that's part of the issue here. You've got a young enough team where Jalen Green is a high pick, is going to be paid pretty good money, but still nothing crazy for several years. The same thing with Jabari Smith. But then you've got so many other players on a similar timeline to where they've got to be taken care of, so to speak. And KPJ is kind of the first one of those as a non-Rockets draft pick. And then next 2 or 3 years, you're in that same boat. I think they should be open to pretty much anything. And I think they should be considering the Celtics and Thunder as reasons why. Having draft assets into eternity doesn't do your fans, your coaching staff, or anybody else in the organization any good. I am not a massive basher of Sam Presti's work because one thing is clear. I do think he understands NBA talent and understands the value of assets and trade. But he did more damage to their ability to win basketball games than he's done to their ability to win basketball games to recover from that horrific decision he made with James Harden trading him to the Rockets. I don't mean the deal itself and the construct of the deal, which also was bad, but I think he felt compelled to move him before he had to. To me, that's one of the worst general managers moves made in the last 15 years in the NBA, and there have been a lot of them. Their championship level team. He decided not to bring back a championship level team for no good reason. You can always move Harden later. You can always do something later. But trading him before he was out of contract with that level of team they had, I thought was ridiculous. And now they're just sitting on all these picks forever, and they're going to be one of the worst teams in the NBA again. I think with Danny Ainge's Celtics, they did that for so many years, and then they realized, well, now I think we actually have the team after he left, and then they removed their head coach. So I would be open to considering moving any of those picks for talent that's currently talent in the NBA. I would be very, very surprised if any trigger was actually pulled on that deal, any deal like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's far less likely than likely. I'm just looking at it mostly through a thought exercise. And again, it doesn't have to be Brooklyn in those picks. You could conceivably use those picks in a deal that has nothing at all to do with Kevin Durant. It's just one possibility. And I think the pushback from at least some on Twitter is going to be about the timeline, because there's some people that are laser focused on this idea that this coming season is the last year, ironically, because of Sam Presti, that the Rockets have control of their own draft pick, because that coming season starting in 2024 is when the remainder of the obligations to OKC from the Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook trade come back into play. And there's a lot of people that are very wary about making any sort of big acquisition or just a capable veteran, bringing someone like that in this offseason, because they are very wary that winning more games in this coming year, let's say winning 32 instead of 20, something like that, is going to compromise their odds in the 2023 draft lottery, which is the last year it's control their own pick for a while. So there's a lot of people that are laser focused on so-called tanking and maximizing odds for this coming season, because that's really the last year you can do it, both between the pick obligations and then we talked about earlier all the salary cap room they're going to have. What's your pushback to that? Because it sounds like, at least as a thought exercise, you'd be pretty open to doing something this offseason if the right deal was there for you.
I would, and just keep this in mind. It's a 20-win team. You give them the number 32, so we'll just work off of that. 32 wins last season would have meant you were the 7th worst team in the NBA, and then would have had the corresponding opportunity on lottery night to find yourself closer to the top. A 7.5% chance to have the number one pick, but a 32% chance to land a top 4 pick. With the worst record in the NBA, you had a 52% chance to land a top 4 pick. With the 7th worst record, you still had a 32% chance to land there. And 10 more wins, or in this case, 12 more wins, that is a massive number. I would not be averse to that at all if I were the organization, if I were the fans, and certainly not if I'm Stephen Silas or any of the players, because a 32-win team, I know it's not much, it's a 50-loss team, but that probably means you're competing. That means you have an ability to win on any given night more often. You're going to be less frustrated during your off days. You're going to be less frustrated when you go to practice. You're going to be less frustrated because you're not getting your teeth kicked in on a regular basis. That is a pretty big jump, and I think they would absolutely be ecstatic for it. So would everybody who bets their over, because I believe the number is in the neighborhood of 25 and a half.
No, I mentioned it as the rosiest scenario because really, if they just go up to 25 wins, it would be silly to get that worked up about those scenarios, especially with the NBA draft lottery having flattened odds to sort of de-incentivize tanking the last few years. I mentioned something like the low 30s because that's probably the rosiest scenario you can put together, in which even with an upgrade, short of the upgrade being Kevin Durant himself, that I think you can get to for this coming season. And even with that, again, I tend to agree with you. If something is available now that can help you, that you mentioned the developmental perspective and putting people in the right frame of mind day in, day out to improve. And the other part of it too is that you'd be in a better position to lure guys in free agency if the team looks competent and if the team isn't coming off 3 years at the bottom of the NBA, right?
If you're a 32-win team or thereabouts, yes, to all of those things, because you'd absolutely be in play for telling that new player,
Right.
We don't plan on spending any future years, any years with you on our team. Not in the postseason, not at the very least in the 7 through 10 range where you got to play your way in. But I think that's absolutely within reach, and really making the jump from where they are in that range. If you're adding a player like that, making another 10-win jump is totally feasible. I mean, you got to look at what the rest of the NBA is doing. You don't always have a Utah situation where a team near the top is going to be terrible the following season, but there's usually 1 or 2 teams there to move past, and that's where the Rockets are trying to figure that out now in the Western Conference because, again, outside of Utah, it is becoming very, very difficult to become one of the teams, making a move up the standings where it matters.
Last player I wanted to ask you about was Alperen Sengun. I think expectations for him entering year 2 are all over the map. Clearly, he's going to be the starting center due to the Christian Wood trade. They did that in large part to open up minutes. Last season was really a mixed bag. There were some incredible highlights. There were games, stretches of games. I think back to the Milwaukee one in December where it looks like you can run your entire offense through him. There was also the fouling difficulties, and that was against backups. Now he's going to be going up against starters. So can he stay on the floor? Even this past week, we saw him in Turkey's friendly. They're getting ready for the Eurobasket tournament in September. And against Slovenia and Luka Doncic, he looked Sengun, that is, incredibly efficient on offense. I think he had 19 points, 9 rebounds in 23 minutes, got to the free throw line 15 times, shot better than 50% from the field, had so many things going well, and yet he only played 23 minutes because he fouled out. So again, there's going to be a lot of highs and lows, but where are you at in terms of reasonable expectations for him in his first year as a starter? Can he play 25, 30 minutes per game? Is that being too aggressive given some of the fouling difficulties? Just what are your expectations for him and what do you want to see from him as he continues, hopefully, his upward trajectory?
Yes, to the minutes question. He absolutely needs to, and I think he can, even with his foul issues. A little over 20 minutes a game last season while barely being a starter, just 13 games out of the 72 that he played. He did lead the team in fouls per 36 minutes, and that is absolutely as troubling as you noted. But he probably, again, go back to the initial part of our conversation, they left him out there to figure it out, what you can and can't do. And I don't think it's not usually a quick process, and it definitely was not for him, because I don't think there was any point in time where we were watching any stretch of games and said, well, I think he's realized, don't do this, you can't do that. He still is looking at the officials like he can't believe that they've made that call on like 93% of the calls they make against him, which is a little high. Even Aaron Gordon thinks that's high. That has to be fixed, and I think it will. And even what he's doing in the offseason, playing as much internationally, will help him because it's going to help him realize how important he is to the team he plays on next. How important he is to the team he's currently on that you were talking about, it's pretty high. He actually needs to play that important role with the Rockets as well. He should be a double-double, pretty easily, even if his minutes are limited. But it's what he's able to do with those minutes. They're probably going to have a guy that's a pretty high usage rate player when he's out there for those very reasons that they're not sure how long he's going to be out there. And obviously this leads itself to a secondary problem, which I don't think they fixed with the Willie Cauley-Stein signing. They are extremely thin up front, quite obviously. I don't think Usman Garuba is a part of the rotation next year. I don't know that Boban is a basketball player for this season. He might be on the squad. And the same
You're not
thing
buying
with
into the
Willie
Bruno
Cauley-Stein.
Fernando? Bruno
I
Fernando
actually,
career renaissance?
I know it seems odd because we know against whom he excelled last year and at the point in the season that he did. But he certainly seems like the type of player that you'd want in that position. He plays above the rim. He's a good rebounder. He is strong. He is athletic, even if he's limited offensively, and he's very limited offensively. I think he led the team in percentage of field goals that were dunk attempts. And yeah, I don't think he's in their plans, but the type of player that he is exactly who I might sit down and say they should go be targeting this player. They should look for a player who's capable of doing this. I thought he could have been a little bit more of a part of what they were doing for longer of last season, and maybe we'll see in the 4 preseason games. They have a little bit more feeling for that, even though he was a late addition, and we'll just have to see. I don't think any of the real answers on who their backup 5 is are on this team right now, but any other one of them would have an opportunity to prove it. And the nicest guy of them all is Boban. And I just don't think he's, again, from a basketball standpoint, everybody in the NBA knows what he is, as do the Rockets. And he's never been a true backup center for a reason. And I don't think that'll change this year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Although people do rave about him in the locker room, so maybe he'll be good for the development of guys like Sengun, having him around. But in terms of actually filling minutes, probably not. Adam, as we wind down, I want to ask you quickly about the schedule. I know it's really not that sexy, the NBA schedule release, when you're a rebuilding team, because, again, other than which Western Conference teams you play 3 times instead of 4, the formula is set, and it's not like the Rockets are trying to make a playoff push this year realistically. What are the things that you're looking for with those obvious caveats in mind? What are the things you're looking for when the schedule comes out, most likely later this week, from everything that I'm hearing and reading?
Probably a little bit of the matchups of the other teams doing what you're doing, the younger teams, the teams that have drafted at the top that are trying to build. Have you advanced past them, especially the ones in the Western Conference? Are you doing the things that give yourselves, your squad, your organization, some comfort in the fact that you might be doing things right, that you do have a little bit of a foundation? Otherwise, it's pretty much the usual suspects. There's no real rivalry that the Rockets and this group have truly created. Very few teams that they, kind of had their way with, obviously, this past season. Certainly not in the Western Conference, but just how they match up with them. The matchups between Orlando and Houston, obviously, Oklahoma City and Houston, for the Smith, Holmgren, Banchero reasons, are obviously there. Matchups with the, 11th best team in the West, the LA Lakers. Those will probably be fun. A John Wall return to Houston, because I think the Clippers will be coming to Houston twice this season. That could be fun.
If I gave you an over-under of 2.5 for initial nationally televised games, keep in mind the schedule can be revised as the year progresses. The NBA has that deal with its TV partners, but over-under of 2.5, which are you taking?
That includes only games on TNT or ABC and ESPN, not NBA TV, correct?
Yes, I'm excluding NBA TV.
I would probably, I think it'll be 2, so I'll
Okay.
take the under.
Barely. All right, that's fair. Yeah, for me, what I'm looking for is at least a friendly start to the season in terms of just overall strength of schedule. I think so much of what happened last year, and I know it was largely due to the Christian Wood, Daniel Tice, just the floor-spacing disaster lineups that they rolled out there. But when they started 1-15, you mentioned earlier sort of the developmental emphasis and having guys in the right frame of mind when they go to practice. Things got so off the rails so quickly. Before Thanksgiving, you even had that report that people were questioning Stephen Silas's future, and if they get off to a 1-15 start this year, that's going to be an even bigger storyline because of what we discussed earlier. Not wanting to go into the lame duck year, you want to commit one way or another, and if he's not the guy, you want to start trying out who conceivably could be your guy. So I want to see them get off to a much better start than 1-15. Hopefully, a weaker schedule will facilitate that.
It's interesting to look at it that way. Just one thought on that, because let's
Mm,
say you have some of those teams like Oklahoma City or Detroit or the Knicks piled up in your early schedule. They had all
mhm,
those teams on their early schedule last year. And when you're not right, you kind of waste those winning
bingo.
opportunities because they lost to all of those teams. And then they, of course, rattled off that big winning streak, their best of the season. And things seemed a little bit better, a little bit quickly. And that helped a great, great deal.
Although, interesting thing about the winning streak is that because it came with
Jalen.
Jalen Green and KPJ for the most part out, it sort of skewed the net ratings all year. We saw this in the debates for first team all rookie between Jalen and Herb Jones, and people would point to the on and off numbers for Jalen. And it's sort of like, well, when you look at the first 25 games of the year, Jalen got all the bad, just the spacing nightmare lineups when he was out there pretty much all the time with Wood and Tice. And yet he got none of the benefits when they ditched those spacing lineups. They finally caught fire for a few games. The Gary Bird explosion, which was the biggest variable of all that went their way in that 7-game winning streak. And really, that just sort of artificially held down KPJ and especially Jalen, their net ratings for the whole year, or at least a large part of the year, just because sort of the circumstances dictated in those first 25 games when they were doing well and when they weren't. And those circumstances had very little to do with those two players. Adam, the last point I wanted to get to, and this is a very lighthearted one, but you've worked really off and on for the last 15 years with the Rockets Radio Network. Now you're doing it with Matt Thomas. Before that, it was Craig Ackerman before he made the shift to TV. What's the biggest differences when you're working as an analyst with Matt versus when you were doing it with Craig?
Probably just the learning part, because it's still relatively early in the working with Matt Thomas era. So just figuring out the spots to drop in and add stuff to it. But the good news is in both cases, I had a long-standing relationship with both before broadcast number one with either. So I think I already had a pretty good feel of where things would fit. I obviously had listened to Craig Ackerman for years doing what he did, and Matt Thomas the same way for all the entities that he's done play-by-play for prior to this stint. So having that understanding of where the fit would be and where you want to augment the broadcast with what you're bringing to the table, I thought it was fairly easy. The differences are pretty, actually, they just have their different sayings. So trying to temper my on-air laughter in the proper way for each of them has been fun. But also attempting to try to get them to elicit a snicker or two is also something that every time I'm after. So it's all been good. It's a lot of
Yep.
fun, and even with the team where it's been, the good news is I think that they're only headed in the right direction, and it'd be fun to be a part of that ride.
Yep. And you actually got to call your first ever NBA game as a play-by-play guy when Matt went into the protocols right before Christmas last year, right?
The Indiana Pacers
Yep.
hosting the Houston Rockets, December 23rd, 2021. Yes, I recall. It was
How much notice did you get, by the way?
that day.
Jeez. Well, it went pretty well. Any lessons learned from it, or how'd you think it went?
I mean, if I would have had a little bit more time to prepare, but the honest thing is, in this business, especially in that, not quite the second chair, but the other chair, there's some preparation going into every game as if there isn't anybody else on the broadcast, if that should
Yep.
come up, if you are needed to do this, that, and the other. And honestly, on that night, that literally was me. I did the pre, post, half, and all the play-by-play with no analyst that entire night, and they were on the road. But having the preparation in place already, it's just kind of a standard thing
Mhm.
that I do before any broadcast. I'd be prepared for anything. All the tidbits you need, and the rosters, the players, and ready to roll.
What's the biggest difference? I promise this is our last point, but I want to get to it. What's the biggest difference between you and Adam Clanton, currently your co-host with the A Team, but when you guys are doing the analyst gig for the Rockets Radio Network? What's distinct about an Adam Wexler game versus an Adam Clanton game?
I'll give you a good answer, which is I will almost assuredly put a lot of numbers into the information that I'm giving the listeners in addition to what I'm seeing and, things that they can't see. And again, this is on the radio side. So, the description Matt gives is excellent, and it's obviously the play-by-play, and you're really getting an understanding of what's happening. But in those moments where I have an opportunity, whether it's a free throw after a foul or the ball's gone out of bounds, to take that next step into here's why this happened. Here are the what actually happened on this play, which defender actually slid over to make that happen, and things like that I'd like to have. But from a statistical point of view, I'll leave that as the simplest difference between the two. But I would encourage everybody to listen all season long and make your own determinations on what a Clanton analyst broadcast and a Wexler analyst broadcast sounds like.
Clanton less data centric.
I mean, you hear that every day for 15 hours a week on the A Team. That's just the way things are for me. Right. And that's totally on me, the nerd.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think, there's multiple ways that you can do it. And of course, that's what makes you guys a good pairing on Sports Talk 790, because you each bring a very distinct approach. And so I think regardless of what your preference is, one way or another, you get them both. And of course, with the Rockets, it depends on which game it is. But I think certainly Matt's a great play-by-play voice, and I'm sure he's looking forward to having both you and both Adams in the analyst chair this season. Adam, thank you so much. Before we close out, where can folks listen to you each day? I know you've mentioned it a couple of times, but get your plugs out of the way here.
Home of the Rockets, Sports Talk 790, 3 to 6 each and every weekday afternoon. It is the A Team along with Adam Clanton. And of course, that's just 3 hours a day. So 24 hours a day. I'm always available at Adam J. Wexler on Twitter. And yes, that's where I live. Sorry to say, but I'm kind of into it.
Yeah, me too, unfortunately. Anyway, we'll wrap it there. For Adam, I'm Ben. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm on there at Ben Dubose. The Rockets Wire is on there at The Rockets Wire. And this podcast, The Logger Line, we don't have a Twitter for it, but we do have a link tree. And of course, you can just search for it at your distributor of choice. Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast, just search for The Logger Line, brought to you by Clutch City Lager of Carbuck Brewing. And you can find this and our archived episodes quite easily. Please stay tuned, because later in the week after the schedule comes out, we're going to have a special episode breaking down what we learned from the schedule, key takeaways, how it was put together, all sorts of things. So stay tuned for that in the days ahead. With that, I'll sign off. Again, for Adam, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another episode of The Logger Line.